guys in the Florida House of Representatives, you got a cabal of them in the leadership. They are colluding with liberal media and the Democratic Party in Florida to try to manufacture smears against Hope Florida, against me, against the First Lady, stabbing you in the back. They are refusing to do their jobs, and they are trying to manufacture smears to support their political agenda.
That was Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, and he is big mad that Florida Republican lawmakers are asking serious questions about a charity closely aligned with his wife, Casey DeSantis. Today, Governor DeSantis knew that State Representative Alex Andrade was holding a hearing on Hope Florida's movement of money into political advertisements. So he went to Andrade's community in Pensacola, Florida, to sharply criticize his fellow Florida Republican for asking these questions.
These smears against Hope Florida, anybody who's making those smears is not serving you well. That is not something that makes sense when very few examples of government actually succeeding in helping to lift people up.
The scandal DeSantis is responding to involves $10 million that Centene, a Medicaid managed care provider, was supposed to pay the state of Florida. Instead, Centene was directed by the state to send that $10 million to First Lady Casey DeSantis' pet project, Hope Florida. Now, we know this because Centene told us they were directed by the Agency for Healthcare Administration in this statement to the Matt Gaetz Show. So where did that $10 million end up? It seems many are concerned that it wound up in the possession of a political committee controlled by James Uthmeyer, who was Governor DeSantis' chief of staff and has since been appointed Florida Attorney General.
Understanding that the money, after it was transferred out of Hope Florida Foundation's account, was immediately turned over to a political committee controlled by Mr. Uthmeyer, do you believe that that is a proper purpose and use of those funds?
I had no awareness of that. And all I could go off of were the assertions made in the proposal. And that was that there would be no use for political activities.
But that's exactly how these ended up being used. Political ads seem like a really bad use of money intended to help poor people get health care. And the person who just answered that question you heard was the president of Hope Florida, Joshua Hay. But if you ask questions about where the $10 million went, you don't know what you're talking about.
You don't even know what you're talking about. You don't even understand what the program is actually doing.
I want to understand. So who does know? We thought we might get answers from the president of Hope Florida at today's House hearing. It seems even he doesn't know how the $10 million are being used.
What's your understanding of how Mr. Uthmeyer's political committee used those funds?
I don't want to speculate. I know there's articles out there, and I've tried not to do that to distort my recollection of the facts. I tried not to look too much into it because, quite frankly, I don't know what the funds were used for.
How could we possibly be in a position where $10 million was directed around the state legislature by state officials and we don't know its destiny? I'm sure Hope Florida has a process, minutes, vetting.
I cannot confirm what the funds were used for. No, we have no monitoring procedures. We have no staff. I'm chairing the volunteer capacity.
Volunteer capacity? Well, now I almost feel bad for the guy. He's a volunteer asked to oversee $10 million in money directed to Hope Florida by the government. Surely he's complied with all of the conflict of interest laws.
Mr. Hay, you testified earlier that you work for an organization called Indelible. Are you still employed with them?
I am.
And does Indelible engage or work with the state, receive state contracts?
We do.
Do you know approximately how much annually does Indelible receive in state contracts?
It's millions.
Wait, so if someone is getting millions of dollars from the state and serving on a board with no controls, and then $10 million ends up in the political committee of the now Attorney General, surely they've at least been keeping proper records so we can follow the money, right?
I know there's been some talks about deficiencies that have been discovered. The list so far that I have is we have unexecuted bylaws. We have a committee that's comprised of 5, not 7. We have no taxes filed, no 990s, no conflicts of interest. Those are the deficiencies that I've listed since the inception of this hearing.
Wow, that's a lot of things to get wrong. They've probably been working on this for a really long time.
And is this going to be the first meeting that you conduct as chair where you address these deficiencies that I've identified?
It will be.
The first meeting? We learned this shocking information as Governor DeSantis was taking a government efficiency victory lap.
As I tell people, we were Doge before Doge was cool.
Doge before Doge was cool? Then surely there was an efficient way to expect and track this $10 million to Hope Florida, right?
Department has no knowledge, to my understanding, that that money was coming into the organization. So it's unsolicited. It's out of the normal course of how those determinations and vetting processes were performed.
No knowledge. Governor DeSantis persisted in his political point that anyone concerned about these troubling facts surrounding Hope Florida was perpetrating a fraud on the voters.
They're trying to sabotage the success because they have a political agenda. These are folks that are not doing what they promised the voters they would do. And that is unacceptable. And what I found in this line of work is if you just tell people what you're going to do, you get in there and do it, not everyone will like it. But they will respect the fact that you said what you're going to do and you followed through. I think what really irks voters is when people tell them, oh, they're the most conservative thing since sliced bread, they're going to fight the Dems, fight the left, and then they get in, and then they collude with the left and collude with the Dems. That's wrong. That's a fraud on the voters.
But the fraud on the voters may have been the governor and his team funding political advertisements with money that should have been returned to the taxpayers of the state of Florida. Now, even as Governor DeSantis says it's fraudulent to ask tough questions, his own aligned entity, Hope Florida, is considering a recoupment of the $10 million that they still can't tie to a lawful use.
Understanding what we do know now about how that $10 million was used, do you believe that Hope Florida's foundation, the Hope Florida Foundation, should attempt to recoup those funds from Secure Florida's future and save our society from drugs?
I believe Hope Florida Foundation is a noble cause, and I think all the money that goes into the foundation should indeed be used for the purposes intended. And that is to help bolster and support families in need. And so with the advice of counsel, I will consult with counsel to see what appropriate actions that we may be able to take for individual recipients and organizational recipients who may not have used those funds as intended.
So as Ron DeSantis is in Pensacola saying that anyone questioning Hope Florida doesn't know what they're talking about and is colluding with the left, the president of Hope Florida was giving testimony to the Florida legislature that they were going to have to consult with lawyers to see if they were going to ask for money back that made its way into the now Attorney General's political committee. Hope Florida wasn't following the law. They received money that they weren't expecting, that was owed to the taxpayers. They then had to fork over that $10 million to two shell organizations, which then in turn turned the money over to the now Attorney General's political fund to run campaign advertisements. That political fund was called Keep Florida Clean. And now the lawyer that Hope Florida has hired to help them paper over their dubious transactions is the lawyer from the political committee, Keep Florida Clean.
With the revelation that you're working with Mr. Jazeel, I did want to point out that Mohammed Jazeel is the counsel for the PAC that received these illicit funds. Did he disclose that conflict to you before offering his service to you to paper Hope Florida Foundation's documents?
No.
Okay. Does your counsel here believe that might be a potential conflict, Mr. Herron?
This is the first I've heard of that.
But the one thing Governor DeSantis does want you to know, this was all the work of his wife.
I really had no ownership of this. I didn't devise it. She devised it. She set the vision. She executed the vision.
Joining us now, Florida State Representative Alex Andrade. Mr. Chairman, what was your biggest takeaway during this explosive hearing?
The biggest takeaway was, shockingly, that this one attorney, Jeff Aaron, who's very close with James Uthmeyer and is Governor DeSantis' personal attorney, is the one that connected Mohammed Jazeel, PAC's attorney, Keep Florida Clean's PAC, connected him to the Hope Florida Foundation to get them into legal compliance. That was astounding, shocking. I think the incompetence is just off the charts there. I was stunned.
I'm trying to think of the right analogy there, because they're going to the entity that ultimately got the money, probably improperly, to now come back and say that it was proper all along. That would be like hiring the robber of the convenience store to perform the audit of the convenience store's books. What do you believe truly was the involvement of Florida's current Attorney General James Uthmeier in this entire scheme?
Well, Congressman, I know that James Uthmeier personally contacted Secure Florida's Future and Save Our Society from Drugs, made phone calls and text messages to these groups and told them to ask for this money. He then connected them with Jeff Aaron, and Jeff Aaron helped them to draft documents to try and paper these grant applications to make them look legitimate. So no, Mr. Uthmeier was involved from the very beginning to include the settlement idea, the idea of steering this money out of this settlement. Mr. Uthmeier was involved in that as the governor's chief of staff. He knew that money was going to Hope Florida. He immediately reached out to 501c4s to ask for that money to come out of Hope Florida's bank account. And then he immediately received that money upon the wire transfer to these two 501c4s. If I'm drawing like a RICO conspiracy, web chart, it's Jeff Aaron and James Uthmeier at the center of it.
Will you be calling those two individuals to testify before your committee?
I haven't decided if I'm going to invite our Attorney General to come speak at committee, but I have invited Jeff Aaron. I've invited Mark Wilson of Secure Florida's Future, and I've invited Amy Rosenhausen of Save Our Society from Drugs to come and speak in my committee next week and explain themselves.
Governor DeSantis was in our home community of Pensacola today saying that critics of Hope Florida don't know what they're talking about. You had a very thorough hearing. What do you think the governor misses about this exchange?
I don't think he's missing anything, Congressman. I think he knows exactly what happened. I think he just thinks the rules don't apply to him. He thinks he's above the law. Unfortunately, our Attorney General, who would normally be investigating these circumstances, is even more involved in acting above the law. So no, I don't think they're missing anything. I just think that denial is an intoxicating circumstance.
I don't know how you could get to the bottom of all of this without having Casey DeSantis and James Uthmeier before your committee to answer questions. Can you let us in on the factors you're considering on whether or not to have a hearing like that?
The factors are exactly what the purpose is. I mean, this is a legislative subcommittee. We're not a law enforcement agency. We're not in a position to recommend impeachment or any other type of sanction. I'm just the guy in control of the healthcare budget in the Florida House. So at some point, this has got to get elevated. Governor DeSantis said something about it's liberal that I'm looking into this. There's nothing liberal about opposing money laundering and wire fraud and Medicaid fraud. I'm stunned that he said that. But at some point, it does have to go beyond this committee just because, again, while I have a big job, it's not the right job to bring this to a conclusion.
The Senate is considering legislation, or I should just say the legislature is, a Hope Florida bill that would bake Hope Florida into law. I got a report that bill is now stalled in the Florida Senate. Should the Florida legislature put Hope Florida into law based on what you've learned about the organization?
No, Congressman, I don't know if you caught, we discussed loneliness services last week and how Hope Florida provides loneliness services. The executive director of Hope Florida, the operational arm, said today he had no idea what loneliness services were. Hope Florida itself, the operational arm, doesn't know what it's doing, doesn't realize that they were part of the state's largest contract, and they were supposed to be providing all of these extensive healthcare services to Medicaid recipients here in Florida. It's like I said last week, it's poorly thought out, and no, I don't believe it's ready for prime time.
Last question for you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned violations of criminal statutes in a prior answer. As you continue to call these witnesses forward and get a clear picture of what happened, do you see yourself possibly making a criminal referral to the U.S. Attorney in the Northern District of Florida if you believe those laws have been violated?
I believe those laws have been violated. The question is whether or not the U.S. Attorney in the Northern District is interested in prosecuting. They don't need a referral for me to do it. So the question is whether or not they'll take it up. If I'm wasting my time by making that referral, I don't want to do it. But no, I firmly believe at this point that federal crimes have been committed. Again, I'm not a prosecutor, so that's a question for the prosecutor. But from my perspective, from everything that I know, I believe the federal crimes have been committed.
Chairman of the House of Representatives Budget Committee on Healthcare, Alex Andrade, is on the case. We appreciate your fight for transparency, and we hope you'll update us on your continuing work.
Thanks, Congressman.